The Rebbe Gesundheit began the Farbrengen this afternoon that today is Shabbos Mevorchim Adar, and together with it, it is also Parsha Shkolim. B'negei Shabbos Mevorchims, we have many Shabbos Mevorchims. We may have 12 Shabbos Mevorchims a year, or we may even have 13 as we have this year. So Shabbos Mevorchim in itself is not such a Dover Chodosh. And as we know, people usually react much different when something is new. That is why we find Chazal tell us, B'negei Divrei Torah, B'negei Divrei Torah, Chazal tell us, Yiyu Beinecha Kechadoshem, that Torah we should always view as Torah, that Torah is like something new. What do we derive from this? That people look at something new with a special enthusiasm. So Mamela Shabbos Mevorchim is something which we have actually every month. Even the month of Tishrei, when we know that Tishrei we do not bench the Chodesh ourselves. However, it is famous, this saying of the Baal Shem Tov, that Tishrei is benched by the Eibishter, and with this koyach, Yidden have strength to bench the Chodesh every single month throughout the entire year. However, Shabbos Parsha Shkolim is something real special, which we really have once a year. Something very outstanding, something very special. Together with it, it is also Shabbos Parshas Pekudei, that's the Seder we read today. And it is also Machal Chodesh. In other words, we bench the Chodesh today, and right after, the following day, right after today, in other words, tonight, immediately Rosh Chodesh begins. And there's a tremendous advantage when we go straight from Shabbos into the Rosh Chodesh without any other things in between. Though how important and how great the other things may be, however, here we have something very special where we go straight from Shabbos into Rosh Chodesh. Furthermore, the Alter Rebbe, in his Shulchan Aruch, in his Nigla Sefer, in the Shulchan Aruch, where the Alter Rebbe discusses the halachas of eating Malava Malke, the Suda of Suda David Malke Meshicha, which is the meal of Malava Malke. So there the Alter Rebbe explains that actually while we eat Malava Malke, the Shabbos is still present. What is the Pshat Malava Malke? We bid farewell to the queen, to Shabbos Malke, so to Shabbos who is the queen. So in other words, Shabbos is still present, and we are Melave, we are baglating the Malke on Shabbos Sanach, on Matzah Shabbos. So actually tonight, when Rosh Chodesh already begins, here we have a combination from Rosh Chodesh and Shabbos. Because Shabbos is really also around Matzah Shabbos, and Rosh Chodesh also begins. Particularly this month is a month of special significance, because we're talking about Adar Sheni. And Adar Sheni is a very special month. Chazal tell us that Takif Mazlei, the Mazl of Yidden is strong in Adar Sheni, and there's another expression in Chazal, Bori Mazle, the Mazl of Yidden is very healthy, B'negeya, the month of Adar. Rebbe says, being that we have two expressions, two girsayas, we must say that both of them are so. So actually this month of Adar Sheni is a very special month for Yidden. The Rebbe says there's a shakla of Italia, there's controversy going on amongst Paiskim, which of the Adars in the leap year, when we have two Adars, we have an Adar Rishon, we have an Adar Sheni, which one is the real Adar and which one is the additional Adar? So as it is agreed and came to conclusion by most Paiskim, Adar Sheni is the real Adar, and Adar Rishon is the additional Adar, the additional month which was added on as a result of this year being a leap year. Therefore, we are entering now this very special month of Adar Sheni, which is the real original Adar. This is the Adar. Even b'negeya lahalach, it's negeya. For an example, if one was born in a year which wasn't a leap year, and he was born in the month of Adar, then his bar mitzvah falls out in a leap year. So the question arises, when should his bar mitzvah be? So according to most poskim, his bar mitzvah is to be in the month of Adar Sheni. Therefore, the month of Adar Sheni comes with an introduction of Adar Rishon before that. And Adar Rishon in itself is also a special month. Because in Shulchan Aruch it's discussed, Benegeya Adar Rishon, the Ramah brings the Toiv Leiv Mishta Tamid, that it's also good to celebrate in the month of Adar Rishon. And a Toiv Leiv, a good-hearted person, is Mishta Tamid, or is always taking part in a Mishta and a feast. So we are entering this Adar Sheni after going through an introduction of Adar Rishon. In other words, we do not enter Adar Sheni from Shvat. Shvat is a different type of a month. Adar Rishon is a month that has a lot of specialty to it because of the fact that, as the Ramah paskins, the Toiv Leiv Mishta Tamid. So here we are entering this month of Adar Sheni after going through Adar Rishon. So Mamela, it's a very special Shabbos, this Shabbos, where all these inyanim are combined together. What is the hiroeh? What is the lesson which we can derive in Avodas Hashem from the combination of all of these inyanim? Being that the main thing of a Yid was Ani lo nivreisi elo l'shamesh es chayni. Why was a Yid created? Only to serve his master. Memela, what kind of lesson can we take out of all these inyanim which is negayah to us in serving our master and serving the Rabbeinu Shalom? So the Rebbe went on, the hiroeh is from the Inyan of Mishkan. What do we read in the beginning of this week's Chazarah? Eile Pekudei HaMishkan, Benegei de Mishkan. Mishkan actually is an idea where the Shechina rested. What does the Torah here tell us? Something which we can derive into a lesson and bring down into our daily life. That each and every Yid, with each and every act of his, is also creating and building a Mishkan and building a Beis HaMikdash. What is the idea of the Mishkan and the Mikdash? The whole goal, the entire goal of the Mishkan and Mikdash was to bring Shechina down into the Mishkan. The same thing, what is the ultimate goal of all the Maisim which are done by each and every Yid? That his Maisim should bring down the Shechina. And just like we find Benegei the Mishkan, Chazal tell us that the Mishkan which had Moshe Rabbeinu's involvement, all the inyanim of Moshe are eternal. Maisim Moshe are nitzchiyim. The same thing each and every Yid, when he creates an inyan of Mishkan, a spiritual Mishkan, it is created in the same sense, just like the Maisa of Moshe, because every Yid has a Moshe Rabbeinu within himself as well. And the Mela, this is created in an eternal way. In other words, every Davar Shebekdusha which a Yid does remains so eternally. As the Rebbe expressed himself, Shechina, bring this idea of Mishkan brings down the Shechina, and the Shechina is tied in with Kedusha, and Kedusha and Shechina are eternal inyanim. Memela, these inyanim remain so eternally. And this is what we go away with from this week's Chazarah, that Eile Pekudei HaMishkan, all the Maisim which a Yid does has to be in the sense of a Mishkan. That just like the idea of the Mishkan is to bring down the Shechina into the Mishkan, the same is all the Maisim of a Yid have to reflect this same thought to bring down Shechina, to bring down the Kedusha of the Rabbeinu Shalom in all whatever he does. And this comes together with the concept of Rosh Chodesh. Because the idea of Chodesh is a Chidush, something renewed. As we mentioned previously, when something is done with a new enthusiasm, when we come across something new, we approach it with a different type of enthusiasm. It's something new. B'chol yom yiyu beinecha kechadashim, like Chazal say, which we just mentioned. The same thing, this avodah of creating a spiritual mishkan in all the deeds of a Yid should be done with the hischachus, with this strength and with this enthusiasm, like he's coming across something new, something which he never ever did yet. And then it will be blessed with a tremendous amount of success as well. Being that it is Parsha Shkolim, so in Parsha Shkolim we read Kisisa Esroish B'nei Yisrael, the Parsha of Kisisa. What is the idea of Shkolim? The idea of Shkolim is that each and every Yid had to contribute a Machzis HaShekel. This was an equal contribution, contributed by each and every one. Machzis HaShekel, a half of a shekel. Pasuk tells us, Esrim Geira HaShekel. How much is a shekel? Esrim Geira. If we had to contribute a Machzis HaShekel, that means 10 Geira, which is a half a shekel. In Halacha, Poskim quote, if one accepts upon himself an inyan shel tzedakah, Poskim compare it to a korban. Just like when one accepts upon himself that he will bring a korban, he has to fulfill his pledge and do so. Otherwise, he is over an alav of the Torah of Bal Te'acher. which the Gemara discusses means one Yontiv, or according to other opinions, it means it should pass 3 Yomim Tovim. In other words, he has time, a complete year, until 3 Yomim Tovim pass. But up to that time, he has to fulfill his commitment of bringing the Korban. The same thing Poskim say is when one takes upon himself a pledge for tzedakah. He has time to fulfill the pledge, but he has to fulfill it just like as if it would be a korban. How is the case if he wants to pay out his pledge? He doesn't pay it in one time. It is perfectly okay. That's how it's quoted la halacha. He doesn't have to give the sum in one. He could pay it out. Machzis HaShekel, the Rambam says, is an exception. When a Yid contributes Machzis HaShekel, it has to be given in one time. He cannot give part today, part at another time, and part at a third time divided. It cannot be done that way. Machzis HaShekel has to be given in one. The emes is, why is Take today's Shabbos Parsha Shkolim? Simple. Because the Mishnah tells us that be'echad ba'adar mashmiyin al hashkolim, that in the first of Adar, that is when the campaign for Shkolim began, for the Machzis HaShekel in the Beis HaMikdash. So that is why today as well, this Shabbos remains as Parsha Shkolim. The contribution of the Machzis HaShekel represents an initial tzedakah, and we all know the greatness of tzedakah. However, together with it, it is not only tzedakah, by the Machzis HaShekel, it has another tremendous inyan with it. It is a contribution towards the upkeep of the Beis HaMikdash, towards the karbanos which were brought in the Beis HaMikdash, which this is something very outstanding in itself as well. However, the Rebbe went on, we find a very strange inyan here. On one hand, we say that the Machzis HaShekel cannot be split, it has to be given at one time. On the other hand, we constantly refer to it as a concept of machzis, of half. Why half? We never find that we should refer to it as the asara geira. Actually, it's asara geira. If a shekel is esrim geira, the machzis is asara. We never pay attention, we never notice any stress that machzis hashekel is referred to as an asara geira. However, always whenever we talk about machzis hashekel, we stress the fact it's a machzis, it's a half. So it's two contrary inyanim. On one hand, it has to be given bebas achas, reflecting unity, given only in one time. On the other hand, we see that it can be given as a machzis, to the extent that even when we today fulfill the inyan of machzis hashekel, which we do on Tainis Esther, it is the minig bechol tfutzis Yisrael. How is machzis hashekel done? We give a half of the matbeya in whatever country we may be living in. So again we see machzis hashekel always was practiced as a concept of halves. Why is this? And at the same time we say that it cannot be broken up, it only must be given at one time. So the Rebbe Zalman explains, the idea of machzis hashekel is, on one hand, a Yid shows that he is only a half. So pshat, he's a half. Whatever he does in partnership with the Rebbeinu Shalom. Whatever a Yid is b'koyach to do, who is the one that gives him the koyachas for it? The Rebbeinu Shalom gives a Yid koyach, he should be able to fulfill all his ma'asim tov. Therefore, there's a stress of half. Why? Because the Yid actually, his ma'asim, in other words, if there would not be, if there would not be the assistance from the Rebbeinu Shalom, he would never be able to achieve what he wants, what he's really achieving. However, at the same time, a Yid has to know, not that he should sit back and say he'll rely on the Rebbeinu Shalom, and therefore he'll do only half, because he'll say he has a partner. He has a partner, therefore he could only do half. This is not so. This is a Torah. Pasuk tells us, "V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha u'v'chol nafshecha u'v'chol miyadecha." We have to love the Rebbeinu and serve him. B'chol nafshecha, b'chol levavcha, with all your heart, and all your heart means both hearts. Levavcha, side the Yetzer Tov and side the Yetzer Hara. In other words, we have to be so successful to see to it that the Yetzer Hara should also be willing to serve the Rebbeinu. Then comes b'chol nafshecha. Then comes the yet higher madrega b'chol miyadecha. Mara tells us b'negei the difference between Parsha Rishona of Krishma and Parsha Shniya of Krishma, the Parsha of Yahavta, as opposed to the Parsha of V'hayim Shemaya. So Mara says, what is the difference? Well, Bracha says, Kan Yisrael oisen Ratzoni Shel Mokim. In the Parsha of Ahafta, it is considered that the Yidden are fulfilling the will of Hashem. The Parsha of V'hayim Shemaya is considered that the Yidden are not fulfilling the will of Hashem. V'hayim Shemaya Tishmu Matzvaysan Shanechem Mitzaveschem. We're discussing, listening to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Still, the Gemara says that according to Parsha Shniya, we are not fulfilling the will of Hashem. Why? So Chazal explain. In Parsha Shniya, in the Parsha of V'hayim Shemaya, it's only mentioned B'chol Levavcha or B'chol Nafshecha. And the V'chol Ma'odecha is missing. In other words, if a Yid serves the Rebishter, B'chol Levavai, with all of his hearts, with both of his hearts, and at the same time, B'chol Nafshay, and it is lacking the V'chol Ma'odecha, Chazal define it that it is considered not Oisen Ratzoni Shel Mokim. So this in itself gives us a little insight how much a Yid has to dedicate himself to the service of the Rebishter. He has to give himself away entirely. And together with it, when can a Yid succeed in the B'chol Levavcha, B'chol Nafshecha, B'chol Me'adecha? Only when the Rebishter helps him. So on one hand, Machzis HaShekel shows us and teaches us how a Yid has to give himself away entirely to the Rebishter. This is reflected in Halacha, in the concept that he has to give it at one time. He cannot split it and give it in several times. However, at the same time, we keep on stressing that all it is a Machzis HaShekel, because a Yid in his own right is only a Machzis and not more than a Machzis. Because there is the other Machzis coming from the Rabbeinu Shalom, which is the HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Oizrei. And if there wouldn't be Chas v'Shalom the Rebishter helping him, then a Taka wouldn't be able for him to fulfill all of this tafkidim. Talking about the Mishkan and the contributions that went for the Mishkan, the Rebbe referred to the first Rashi in Parshas Truma, where Rashi tells us, Begimel Trumois HaKosav Medaber, that the Pasuk discusses three Amru Rabbeinu in the first pasuk in Parshas Truma. Amru Rabbeinu Gimel Trumois Amuris Kan. That the Torah, when the pasuk says V'yikhu li Truma, Me'ez Kolishan Sheyedvenu li Beitikhu es Trumasi, the pasuk is really discussing three types of Trumas. Why is there a need for right away for Rashi? When Rashi gets into Parshas Truma, to give a general introduction that there are three types of Trumas. Because as we go on reading in Parshas Truma, we see that after the Yidden brought the Trumais, then Moshe Rabbeinu was Makriv Karbanos. So the question arises right away, where did Moshe Rabbeinu have funds to be Makriv these Karbanos? So that is why Rashi tells us right away that there were three types of Trumais. And the second Truma was a Trumas HaMizbeach, which was Liknus Mehen Karbanos Sibah. So therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu had already funds to be Makriv Karbanos. And when we're talking about Karbanos, there's the Karban Tamid, which this is a Karban which had to come always the first of all Karbanos and the last of all Karbanos. In other words, Allah Hashleim Kol HaKarbanos Kulam, as we say in davening, this was the last one of all Karbanos. That was how the Beis HaMikdash would close with those karbanos, and this was as well the opening of all the karbanos as well. Gemara tells us, Im ro'isa talmid chacham shechota bayoim, al taharer achav balayla. If you saw a talmid chacham that sinned by day, don't you think after him at night, in other words, don't think at night that person sinned, because he already had a chance to do tshuva. Rabbi said, let's explain the Chassidus, what's the pshat? He already had a chance to do tshuva, being that he sinned by day. So from after his sin, after his aveirah, there was already a Korban Tamid which was brought, because a Korban Tamid is always brought towards the end of the day. This Korban Tamid accomplishes a kapara for all the aveirahs which were done by Meshach today. So this is the tremendous koyach which is in the Korban Tamid, that the Korban Tamid has such a tremendous thing within itself, that if one did any type of an Aveira during the day, when the Korban Tamid is brought in the evening, towards the evening, which this is the last one of the Korbanos brought every day in the Beis HaMikdash, it creates a kapara, a forgiveness for all of the Aveiras which were brought during the day. Then later in the Farbrengen, The Rebbe soll gesund sein, learned the Rashi in this week's Chazarah, which is in Parshas Pekudei, right at the beginning of the Chazarah. Few psukim in the Chazarah, Kapitel Lamed Ches, Pasuk Chav Daled. Rebbe stressed that at previous occasions he already came out to learn this Rashi, but there's still inyanim which require explanation in this inyan. In fact, the Likot, the Sicha, which comes out, the weekly Sicha, which is published weekly, this week's Sicha also deals with this inyan which is discussed here in the Rashi. After the entire Mishkan was completed, Moshe Rabbeinu is reporting to the Yidden, and he's telling them as follows. Actually, what he's doing here, he's giving a detailed accounting what was done with all the Zahav, Kesef, and the Choshes which was raised for the Mishkan. And he begins all the gold, silver, and copper which was raised towards the Mishkan. He begins with Kol HaZahav ha'asu l'mlacha b'chayom lechas HaKodesh. What was the total of the Zahav? Total of the Zahav was Teisha ve'eschem kiker, 29 kiker, u'shva meyes u'shloishim shekel b'shekel HaKodesh. That's all he describes about the Zahav, is this brief description. Comes to Kesef, how much Kesef was raised, gives a complete detail how much Kesef was raised, and he tells us exactly what was done with the Kesef. Psukim go on telling us exactly how the Kesef was spent. Lotzekes es adnei HaKodesh, adnei HaParoiches. Then the pasuk goes on furthermore. It was used for various inyanim in the Mishkan, for the adnei, the shvel. What's a shvel? Lotzekes oisegisen. In other words, it was converted into Adnei HaKodesh and to Adnei HaParoiches. Then the pasuk goes on. There was still something left of silver. It was also used for Vavim La'amudim. So that we see that the pasuk is giving us an exact, detailed accounting what was done with all the silver which was raised for the Beis HaMikdash. Comes to Nechoshes. On the Choshes Hatnufa, how much Nechoshes was raised? The pasuk tells us how much it was raised. Pasuk also tells us how the Nechoshes was spent. The only thing which the pasuk tells us how much was raised, and the pasuk does not say how it was spent, is the gold. Gold is the most expensive, most precious of all of these three commodities. Torah tells us how much gold was raised. Moshe Rabbeinu did not give an accounting what was done with the gold. Obviously, it's something very strange. Naturally, Moshe Rabbeinu was a Neman, was full of, everybody had the highest trust in Moshe Rabbeinu, but still Moshe Rabbeinu found it proper, and this is taken the right way as it should be, by any Gabbai Tzedakah, to go ahead and report exactly what he did with the funds that he raised. So Moshe Rabbeinu reports how much gold he raised, but he does not tell us what he did with the gold. Reports exactly how much silver was raised, tells exactly what he did with it. Reports exactly how much copper was raised, tells us exactly what he did with it. What he did with the gold, he does not say. There's a medrash, just like I quoted in this week's Sicha, that when Moshe Rabbeinu gave a report on all the inyanim here, he reported what happened with all the silver, and then the pasuk begins, V'sa elef u'shva meyos, 1,775, which was left over in the silver, was made for Vavim La'amudim. So the Medrash says that what is this pasuk? That Moshe Rabbeinu reported exactly what happened, and he forgot to say what happened with the remainder of the silver. So a baskel came out, baskel min hashamayim, and continued this pasuk, which Moshe Rabbeinu did not report what was done with the remainder of the silver.
Silver or gold?
Silver. Again, this is in Pshutish Shal Mikra, it's something which is very strange, because Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't alone. Moshe Rabbeinu had Betzalel with him. He had all other Chachmei Lev with him. Moshe Rabbeinu there was an entire crew of people which were involved in setting up the Mishkan. So if it did slip Moshe Rabbeinu's mind for a moment, what was done with all the details of the silver which was raised for the Mishkan, there were the people around Moshe Rabbeinu which were able to remind him and tell him exactly what it went for. Why was there a need for a baskoil to come down in Hashamayim and go ahead with this pasuk? To say, if one should want to say, that once this baskoil came down, so Mamela people already realized to have full trust in Moshe Rabbeinu. Because if Moshe Rabbeinu didn't tell us exactly where all the silver went, a baskol came and told us exactly what happened with the remainder of the silver. That is why Moshe Rabbeinu already didn't have to tell us in detail about the gold. Rabbi says it's Pshutish Shal Mikra. It's very hard to satisfy ourselves that way. Why? Because gold, the Torah discusses before silver. The inyan of the baskol happened when Moshe Rabbeinu, if we should already accept an inyan, for whatever reason, there was a need for a baskol. Because first the Torah discusses the gold, then the Torah goes ahead and discusses the silver. Unless we should say that what happened was first Moshe Rabbeinu gave a report on the silver. Why in the Torah is that discussed after the gold? Because the Torah is discussing it in a sequence of a davar, a choshev, whatever is more value first, which is the gold. Then the Torah discusses the silver. To get involved in Pshutish Shal Mikra, in such type of an interpretation, the Rebbe says this is very, very not much suitable for Pshutish Shal Mikra. So we're back to the question, why is it that B'negeya everything else Moshe Rabbeinu gives a detailed report, and B'negeya the gold Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't? And the Rambam says, this question is raised in Adam Mefarshim, and Rashi, whose Indian is Pshutish Shal Mikra, and this is such an obvious, outstanding question, passes all these psukim and does not pay any attention to such type of a shayla. So the Rebbe Zilzun in his learning also mentions that there is a Rabbeinu Sadji Goyen. Rabbeinu Sadji Goyen says that if we will go through all the inyanim which were created out of gold, we will come to a total of the Teisha Ve'esrim Kikar, of the 29 Kikar and something which were raised in gold. Because we know that the Menorah weighed a Kikar. That's what the Torah tells us. Then there were other inyanim which were made out of gold for the Mishkan. If we're going to go through all these inyanim, the child could come to a total of 29. Child or the person who's learning Chumash could come to a total of approximately 29 kikar. But again, the child's inyan is not to go ahead and make calculations how much gold went into this inyan, how much gold went into another inyan, and then come to a total that all the kalim which were made really total 29 kikar. So the Rebbe is learning. Torah here is discussing the gold which was raised for the Mishkan. And the pasuk says, "Kol hazav v'osri l'mlacha b'choil malachas hakodesh v'hi zahavat nufa." And this is an extra word here in the pasuk. Pasuk is stressing the gold which was raised was 29 kikar and something. Why is there a need for the pasuk to add this word v'hi zahavat nufa? This word nufa is obviously extra. Pasuk should have said v'hi hazahav. This is what the total gold was, kach v'kach. Somebody says no. It is very simple. If we look through all the kalim which were made out of gold, there are quite a bit. The menorah, first and foremost, which as the pasuk itself tells us that it weighed a kikar. Then there were 48 koshim. There were 48 boards in the Mishkan. Each one of the koshim were a height of 10 amos. All of these 48 koshim had to be covered with gold on both sides, which this uses up quite a bit of gold. Then we know there were the kruvim, and there was the Aron, and there was the Shulchan, and there was the Mizbeach. There were many kelim. There were kelim itself. There were many vessels in the Mishkan which were made out of gold. So if we really come to think of it, we come to a different problem. Not only the question arises, what did Moshe Rabbeinu do with the gold? Obviously, there was much more gold spent than Moshe Rabbeinu really raised. Actually, the Rebbe brought in another pasuk. There's a pasuk in Parshas Vayakhel, where the Torah tells us that whatever the Yidden needed for the Mishkan was raised in full, the hoiser, and there was left. Not only did they have whatever they needed, but there was a leftovers. Rebbe says this is a gewaldige question here. If there were leftovers, Moshe Rabbeinu is reporting everything that happened. How every bit of gold, silver, and copper was utilized for the Mishkan. What happened with the leftovers? Moshe is not giving us any din v'cheshm, any accounting what happened with it. And the pasuk says beferish, there was there was enough, as a hoiser, and left over. And here we see how everything is extremely accurate. If we turn back to Parshas Vayakhel, right before Revi in Vayakhel, and we look into Kapitel Lamed Vav, Pasuk Vav, when it seemed like they had all enough for the Mishkan, Vayitzav Moshe Vayaviru Koel B'machna Leima Ish V'Isha Al Yasu Oid Malacha L'Tchumas HaKodesh Vayikolei Yom Mahavi. Vayikolei simply would mean they stopped. Rashi comments on the word Vayikolei, Loshen Miniyah. They were stopped from bringing. In other words, Rashi is teaching us here, introducing a new inyan. Not the pshat that they were leftovers. Once Moshe Rabbeinu saw that if the Yidden will keep on bringing, it will reach to the hoiser, it will reach to more than what they need. Here Moshe Rabbeinu was Vayikolei. What does Vayikolei mean? Miniyah, Mona. He stopped them from bringing more. So the Yidden Taka didn't bring more than what was really needed. Moshe Rabbeinu saw as the trend was going and with how they were contributing, if this would keep up longer, then it would reach to a v'haiser. So Moshe Rabbeinu didn't want it should come to a v'haiser because there was no need to have more than what they really needed. So therefore Moshe Rabbeinu stopped, put a stop to it. Mana, he stopped them from bringing more. He stopped them from bringing more, so there was takanova v'haiser. Back here to our pasuk, Kol Hazav v'Osu L'Mlacha. This is whatever they raised in the gold. They raised 29 kikar plus whatever the pasuk says. However, this was not enough. So Moshe Rabbeinu had to add on from his own money. And as we learned in Rashi a few weeks ago, Moshe Rabbeinu was extremely wealthy, as the pasuk tells us, Psol Lecha. And Parshas Kisisa, Moshe Rabbeinu nis asher. Not only was he an osher, but Rashi says nis asher harbe. He was extremely wealthy. So if Moshe Rabbeinu was extremely wealthy, he had enough money, enough funds to contribute all the missing gold for the Mishkan. So that's why there was no need for Moshe Rabbeinu to report exactly what was done with all the gold, because this is why the pasuk stresses Vayhi Zahavat Nufa. The pasuk doesn't say the Zahav which was used for the Mishkan, or all the Zahav which was involved. There was much more. There was a need for much more gold. However, the Zahavat Nufa, the Zahav which was raised, was 29 kikar plus. Where did Moshe Rabbeinu get the remainder of the gold which he taka needed? Because there was so much gold needed in the Mishkan, this Moshe Rabbeinu contributed from himself. Therefore, B'negei Kesef and B'negei Nechoshes, Moshe gives a detailed report, because this was all in Yonim which was raised from the Yidden. And once the pasuk uses already the word Hatnufa here by Zahav, the pasuk sticks to the word Tnufa by Kesef and by Nechoshes as well. However, B'negei Zahav, B'negei the gold, here Moshe Rabbeinu added from his own money much more than the Yidden really raised. And that is why Moshe Rabbeinu had no need to report where all the gold went, what all the gold was utilized for, because there was so much kalim of gold, and there was so many inyanim of gold, the kruvim and all the boards which were covered, and the menorah and all these kalim which were created out of gold, that there was no need for Moshe Rabbeinu to get involved in a detailed report, because by the mere fact saying that 29 kikar plus was raised, here in itself all the Yidden present then knew that there was a need for much more gold than 29 plus kikar. The Rebbe says there may be some that would want to have a different teretz, and learn that b'negeya kesef and nechayshes, they finished using the kesef and they finished using the nechayshes already. However, the zahav wasn't finished yet. The bigdei kahuna, which was not made yet, had threads of gold. And that is why the pasuk does not tell us a detailed report b'negeya melechas amishkan on all the inyanim of zahav, because the avodah with zahav was not completed yet. This the Rebbe says again in Pshutei Shel Mikra. It's very hard to learn this way, because most of the inyanim, more than most, were already done. What was needed for big tekahuna was just a small amount of gold, which was poured into threads of gold, which was added on the big tekahuna. Because of this, Moshe Rabbeinu should hold himself back to give a report to Yidden what he utilized all the gold for. In Pshutei Shel Mikra, it's very hard. However, this way, the way we're learning, what the Rebbe Zalman is learning now, comes out much glatiker, and it's also understood in Pshutei Shel Mikra why Rashi doesn't even have to get involved and raise the question, this type of a question, why the pasuk doesn't tell us where all the gold went, what all the gold was utilized for, as opposed to all the other inyanim, because it's self-explanatory and it's very obvious as we go through all these psukim. Then the Rebbe Zalman mentioned there's a pasuk mishpatim, v'rapa yerape, he shall heal. So Chazal tell us, mikan, from here we learn, shenitna reshus l'roife l'rapes, that the Torah gives us reshus, that we have to, Torah gives reshus a roife to heal, and to such an extent that it is in halacha, if one doesn't feel well and he has to come on to a doctor, we are obligated to listen to what the doctor tells us and fulfill whatever the doctor has told us to do. Furthermore, the inyan of Rape Yerape, the mere fact when we know that we have a doctor and we know that there is a doctor around that could help us, this in itself also has an impact on a person, that when one doesn't feel well and knows that there's a doctor around and he has access to a doctor, that a doctor should be able to alleviate his pain and make it easier on him. This in itself is also something which makes it easier upon the person. Then we come to another step. How it makes it easier for the person who knows that there is a doctor around, and he knows that he doesn't feel well, and he knows that he has access to a doctor. It makes him easier to hold out his pain. Sorry, I'll explain it. How much more so, the Rebbe says, is it when at times one has to come on to a doctor and there's a problem how to get to the doctor. And this is when Hatzalah comes in, and he's able to reach to the doctor and to a proper doctor with the assistance of Hatzalah, of a Hatzalah car, which this is a tremendous help to a person. The emphasis, the Rebbe says, we should hope that we shouldn't have to come on to it. But just by the mere fact of one going out to people that have certain types of restrictions, health restrictions, and they have to hold themselves back from certain inyanim. Says, and Alpi Musa, Alpi the derech of Musa, the Rebbe says in Chassidus, usually we talk about happy inyanim, about very freiliche Sachen. However, in Musa Sfarim, there is also many times inyanim which are discussed, which are not as happy. The Rebbe says, if one has to hold himself back from an inyan, b'negei his health, however, there's the zoilel v'seiva within him that's driving him, that he, in other words, if one is not allowed to eat certain inyanim, for example, so there's the zoilel v'seiva within him, which is pushing him. What would be the proper translation of a zoilel v'seiva? Again? Okay. That's right. That's driving him and pushing him that he should eat more, he should drink more. However, when he goes outside and he sees the Hatzalah car, this in itself is a reminder, this warns a person that he should watch his health. He should protect himself. Otherwise, he may chas v'shalom have to come on to this car and have to get their assistance. The Rebbe spoke very much in praise of Hatzalah, and that Hatzalah is having a Malav Malka tonight. And he says when an Indian is publicized that there's a fundraising campaign going on for a specific Indian, he says people have two attitudes. One may hear noise of fundraising, so he will run away. He doesn't want to be approached. However, the right way is that when people hear that there's an Indian funds that are being raised for a specific Indian Shalstake, and he hears the noise around it, then what he will do, and that is the right thing to do, then he will volunteer and go ahead and volunteer his contribution. Memela b'negei Hatzalah, the Rebbe spoke, it is something which is extremely worthwhile, very positive Indian. The Rebbe says we hope that we shouldn't have to come onto it and we shouldn't have to use it. However, Rebbe expressed himself, we should be zeicha to make use of this of this car. Constantly kept on expressing himself. When Mashiach will come, we shall be able to make use of this and fill up this kele with beautiful karbanos and beautiful inyanim which we shall bring towards the Beis HaMikdash. Chazal tell us that when Mashiach will come, asidim bate knesiyos or bate midrashim shebebavel, Chazal tell us that when Mashiach comes, all the shuls, all the bate knesiyos and all the bate midrashim which are in Bavel will be transplanted into Eretz Yisrael. What's the meaning? The Rebbe says it does not mean that in Eretz Yisrael there's a shortage of shuls. In Eretz Yisrael there are many shuls, many bate knesiyos and many bate midrashas. The only thing is, this is such a worthwhile thing. The shuls where Yidden davened and Yidden learned that they deserve that when Mashiach will come, that they should be transplanted and be taken over to Eretz Yisrael. The same the Rebbe says is b'negei this car. When Mashiach will come, this car will also be taken over to Eretz Yisrael. Hagam, when Mashiach will come, we're going to go to Eretz Yisrael, as Chazal tell us, Emanane Shmaya, we're going to be traveling with the clouds. We won't even have to need this car. So this car will also go into the Anane Shemaya, into the clouds, and together with the car, all of us, we will all be going with Mashiach Tzidkenu to Eretz Yisrael. And there's an expression that bis to the kretschme, and kretschme is an inn, a bar, an inn, until a tavern, bis to the kretschme, expression darf man euch haben a bissel bramfen. It's an old Yiddish expression like that. The Rebbe says, speaking a little in edeler ICS, a little finer, a little bit of mashkes, chassidim take. So therefore, until we will come to until then, this car should be utilized for preparation for the coming of Mashiach, for the preparation of the beautiful gifts and beautiful karbanos which Yidden will bring in the Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi, which is already Omed Obani, which is already in existence, but all that has to happen is that it has to come down and be revealed to us, and we should all be able to go to this Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi. While talking about the Indian of Geula, Rabbi says that for Geula we shouldn't have to wait much longer. And Geula should come right away. At the end of the Elef HaShishi, once we will reach the Elef HaShvi, then Mashiach will definitely have to come. But why should we have to wait that long? It is already Erev Shabbos in the afternoon. The spiritual sense. Erev Shabbos. Shabbos is the 6th day. We are now in the Elef HaShishi. The 6,000. So let Mashiach already come. Rabbi quoted a story from the Bach, that it is brought that the Bach was Mekabel Shabbos and Daven Meirev, and he went home and he made Kiddush. After making Kiddush, they had the entire Suda Shabbos. After Suda Shabbos was Birchas HaMazon. After Birchas HaMazon, they went for a walk. And the story concludes, Va'adayin hayoim godel. And when they came back, it was still the middle of sunlight, it was still day. So the Rebbe said, let the same thing happen now. Let Mashiach come. When Mashiach will come, we will enjoy tremendous inyanim. We will also have a tremendous suda, tremendous feast. We'll have the feast with the Levi Yasan and with the Shei Rabbas. Chazal tell us all these inyanim in detail. After that, we will all be blessed. Ishtachas gafnoi v'ishtachas teinasoi. This is as it is predicted, whatever will happen, that everybody will get his share in Eretz Yisrael. And the Rebbe concluded, V'adayin hayoyim gadol, and it'll all be still in the middle of the day. Why postpone? Why say that these inyanim will happen later? Let it happen right now. It is already the time that it should happen. Rebbe quoted from the Mittel Rebbe, that the Mittel Rebbe writes in his Sfarim that the tzaras that Yidden had are already enough. There is no need, chas v'shalom, for the tzaras to repeat. There's enough of tzaras we had. And what we need now is the inyan of Geula. And Geula, not to wait hundreds of years more for Geula, but Geula should happen right now. V'oid hayom gadol, as long as it's still the middle of the day, Geula could still come. But talking about so many inyanim, there's one other major inyan which we cannot pass by and has to be mentioned. And it is Shabbos. And mefakchen al tzorchi tzibur b'Shabbos. On Shabbos we discuss inyanim. We take care of public needs on Shabbos. And we are already getting close to Purim. This Shabbos gives bracha to next Shabbos. Next Shabbos already gives bracha. My name is, we know the Zohar. The Zohar tells us that Shabbos gives bracha to the entire week. So next Shabbos gives bracha to that entire week, which already has Tainis Esther in it. And also the coming Shabbos, which is already Erev Purim. And as discussed, the meaning that Shabbos gives bracha for the entire week doesn't only apply to the Sheshes Yemei HaMaaseh. It applies to the seventh day as well. So actually this forthcoming Shabbos is already Mekasher to the Shabbos afterwards, which is already the Shabbos of Erev Purim. Therefore, it is already the time to alert everyone to see to it that the inyanim of the mitzvahs of Purim should reach to each and every Yid, should reach to all Yidden, as the expression is in the Megillah, V'chol Medina, all Medinas, any country or any city or any community, wherever they may be Yidden. It is our obligation to see to it that they should be familiar, and we should help them if there's any help needed to fulfill all the inyanim and all the mitzvahs of Purim. Also, another inyan, Shazman Groma, which is Negeya, not only B'Negeya, the Mifzoyim of Purim, but all of the Mifzoyim in general, to reach out to all the Yidden, wherever we have a possibility, to see to it, to reach them with all of the Mifzoyim. And an inyan which is of complete importance now is the inyan of the printing of the Tanya. The Rebbe mentioned that a tremendous satisfaction and happiness was to him this Friday, this Erev Shabbos, when he received a Tanya which was printed in a far-away island, where it was discovered that there are Yidden living in that island as well. And the Tanya was printed in that place, which is a tremendous thing and brought him a tremendous satisfaction. And it is the time now to see to it that wherever Yidden live, any country or any city or any Moshav, where there are Yidden, regardless the amount of Yidden, there are many Yidden or even lesser amounts of Yidden. Chazal tell us if there's Echad Sheyoshev V'Isik B'Torah, if there's one Yid learning Torah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu joins in with him as well. So even if we may be successful in finding communities, cities or places where there's only one Yid there, Mishnah tells us that when there's one Yid learning Torah, he is rewarded by the Rabbeinu Shalom. The Rabbeinu Shalom says, Avay lecha ve'rachticha. The Rebbe says he will come to this individual Yid and bring bracha and bring blessing to this individual Yid. So Memela, we see the tremendous inyan in printing a Tanya in each one of these places. The Rebbe says even in an area where there are very few Yidden or even one or two Yidden, and this is done properly and it's publicized properly, though there are not other Yidden to reach, to involve them in learning in this specific Tanya which was printed there, it will also have an impact on the Goyim who are around that particular community, and B'negei, the fulfillment of the Zayim mitzvahs, B'nei Noach, which they are obligated to fulfill. The Rebbe quoted from the Haskama and the Tanya, which was written by Rabbi Yehuda Leib HaKoyen. And Rabbi Yehuda Leib HaKoyen writes that the Tanya is based on the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. He writes, Ke'eis yismach Yisrael bihigoles divrei kodshay. And who is he referred to? This means the Baal Shem Tov, because the Tanya is the Torah Chabad, which is the Torah Shebiksav of Chassidus Chabad, and Tanya is based on the Inyanim of the Baal Shem Tov. However, the Rebbe says, being as we are, it was related to us by the Rabbeim, that the Alter Rebbe was a Neshama Chadasha, a new Neshama that came down into this world, and successful in both Inyanim. As his name tells us, Shnei Oyer, he was a double illumination. He was an Oyer in Nigla Torah, and he was an Oyer in Pnimis HaTorah. So we must say that in the Tanya there are also as well Inyanim of the Alter Rebbe, which are Inyanim Mechudashim in Torah, new Inyanim in Torah, which were revealed by the Alter Rebbe himself, being that he was a Neshama Chadasha, so he was Megale Inyanim Chadashim in Torah. Rebbe explained that his name was Shneier Zalman. However, the main name is Shneier. The name Zalman is not a name in Lashon HaKodesh. This is in Halach, it's referred to as a kinui. It's an additional name. The name Zalman, also, if we take the same lettering, we get the word Lizman. In other words, the teachings of the Alter Rebbe, which is Shnei Yoyer. He's a double illumination in Nigla Torah as well as in Pnimis HaTorah, are to reach out to all zmanim and to all mekaymis, to all areas and at all times. And Mamela the Rebbe expressed himself very strongly, Ashrei chelkam v'godel scharam. How great is the reward, and how praised are those who are successful and can utilize their strength, and seeing to it that the Tanyas are printed in any country or in any city, in any area where there are Yidden, and regardless the amount of Yidden. The Rebbe will help that when Mashiach will come, we will go out of Gullus together with the Tanya and together with those that have learned the Tanya. All these Tanyas and all the learners of the Tanyas will all be taken out of Gullus and entering out Yisrael together with Mashiach. The Rebbe mentioned the beginning of the Tanya begins with Mashbiyim Oisei Tehi Tzadik Val Tehi Rasha. Who does this apply to? This applies to a newborn baby. When a child comes down into this world, Chazal tell us, an oath is given to the child that he shall be a tzaddik and not a rasha. Same thing, our time of Golis is considered an Inyan, a pregnancy time of Yidden. The time of Geulah is considered Leida. That is the birth of Klal Yisrael. When will Yidden reach to a higher level, a level of a birth in Klal Yisrael in the spiritual sense? This will be when we will go out of Golis into Geulah. So that is why the whole Inyan of Mashbiyim Oisei Tehi Tzadik Val Tehi Rasha, getting extra strength from the Rebishter to be a tzaddik and not being a rasha, is very applicable to this whole Inyan, because this is a step closer in Hafatzas HaMayones, and spreading the Inyan of Chassidus is what brings about to closer to going out of Golis, going out of the Inyan of Ibu, and doing it should be without pain, without Chavlei Leid, as the Rebbe expressed himself, and entering to Geulah, the rebirth of Klal Yisrael in a sense of Tehi Tzadik Val Tehi Rasha. And all of this should be done properly and accordingly. Has to be done in a Seder, and all the reprintings of the Tanya and all the editions, as it's done all over the world, has to have a permission from Kahas, which is the publishing agency of Lubavitch. And this is something which was founded by the Frierdiker Rebbe, and it's an abbreviation, Kahos, which abbreviates the words Karnei Hoid Torah, as well as the abbreviation Kahos, which, all of this was composed and was the idea of the Frierdiker Rebbe. When the Rebbe mentioned about the Tanya, which has reached here this Friday, and this is the place where the Frierdiker Rebbe has davened and learned Torah, Avodah, Gemilas Chasadim for 10 years of his life, and any Inyan of Kedusha remains eternal. So it will be with all of these Tanyas and with all the learners of the Tanyas, which will bring closer to the Inyan of Geulah, to the coming of Mashiach, and with all of these Tanyas and learners, we will go across Mashiach Tzidkenu. A gute Woche and a guten Chodesh.